Hey guys, it's Anna from Bright Lane Gardens. Today we have another native landscape design video where I walk you through how I design and draw out the layouts for my native landscapes around my house. The area that we are working with today is a smaller area. It's about 8 foot by 10 foot and in a weird little oblong oval shape. So it's about 80 square feet total. This is a great tutorial if you have a smaller space in your yard that you're looking to landscape and want to know some tips and tricks on how to lay everything out to maximize a smaller area while including as many native plants as you can. For my landscape design videos, I love to walk you through every step of my design process. So that means starting with a sheet of graph paper and starting with the basic shape of the area I'm looking to landscape. From there, I'm going to go ahead and identify any permanent structures like large rocks or garden arbors, and then I'll add in which direction the sun is coming from and identify any areas of shade. I'll also note any areas of drought or moist soil. And once all of that is fully mapped out, that's when I can finally begin the process of identifying which plants I want to place where and why I like to put them in that particular order. One last note on this video, I have a couple edible plants going in, and that is such a top landscaping trend right now to incorporate edible perennial plants into your beautiful landscapes. So we do have a few examples of that coming into this landscape today, and I'll also offer some other edible plant suggestions that you can add in your own landscape. Here's a video of the area that we are going to landscape today. This area is about 8 foot by 10 foot. It's roughly 80 square feet, and it's in somewhat of an oval or oblong shape. It has a pre-existing rock border on it that I am going to keep. The soil in it is pretty rich. It's got really good natural breakdown. It's never had weed fabric over it, and it goes through the natural breakdown cycle with leaves each year, so it's nice and rich soil. The soil level is a little lower than I would like to see it, so we'll likely be adding some topsoil back into this area. This area does also have some underground electric that I'll point out during the mapping process. I'll show you how I mark that and what special precautions I take for areas like that. I've also got a pre-existing stump and a fake rock in here that's covering an electrical panel. So there's a lot happening in such a small space, and there are some additional precautions we'll need to take to work around some of those pre-existing structures. Now that we've got a good idea of what type of space we're working with today, let's head on over to my drawing table so we can start to map things out. Okay, so first things first, we did start out with the general shape of the area that we'll be landscaping today. I also added a nice little plant list over to the right here. I always like to have that on the same sheet of paper as my actual design because it makes it a lot easier to reference the name of the plant, the height of the plant, and the bloom time of the plant, which is very important. So these are the details that I always start out with anytime I'm working with a landscape design. This is graph paper, and I first and foremost want to establish a scale. Since I already drew out the existing shape of this area, I already know what my scale is. Each one of these squares is approximately a half foot. So this area is approximately 8 foot by 10 foot. Of course, it's not perfect. Nothing in nature ever is. But starting off with a general scale of things will really help you get a better idea of what your final layout will look like with the plants that you've chosen. Once you have the basic shape of your area drawn, your next step is going to be to add in those pre-existing structures that I talked about before. So looking at that video, you could tell there was already a couple things that I had pre-existing. First and foremost is going to be that rock border, which I'm not going to draw in this here, but it is important to really envision what sort of natural border or barrier you have around your landscaped area because it really helps to tie in the overall picture of what things will look like. Next, I'm going to add in that very large fake rock that we had. It was up here and off to the corner, and it was about a 2 foot by 2 foot rock, so it means I'm going to take up about 4 squares in one direction and 4 squares in the other direction. It's set off from the back just a little bit, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. So this right here is going to be my nice little fake rock. Go ahead and label that so we know what we're working with. Now, this little fake rock conveniently is actually covering an electrical panel, which means I have underground electric somewhere in this area. Fortunately, I was there when it was installed, so I know exactly where that underground electric is. But if you do not know where your underground electric is, you have to call Miss Dig. I'll add the number in the description. This is a free service. Do not ever dig in your backyard without calling Miss Dig if there's something under there. If you're unsure, please call Miss Dig. I cannot emphasize this enough. These are preventable injuries. These are preventable mistakes. So just call Miss Dig. It's a free service and you'll never regret being sure. I don't have to call her today because I do know where it is. This electrical goes straight out from my rock here. So I'm going to draw a nice thick line indicating that. Now, of course, since this electrical was installed a year or two ago, I'm going to be very safe and I'm going to go 2 foot in this direction and 2 foot in this direction and basically consider this whole area here as a hand dig area, which means I'm not even using a shovel. I'm actually digging with my fingers and gloves to plant anything that I plant in this area. So I'll go a little bit more in depth on some of the special precautions I'm taking here and which types of plants I'm going to choose to plant here once we get to this section. The second pre-existing structure in here is a really annoying one that I wish didn't exist, but it does, and there's nothing that I'm going to do about it. So unfortunately we have a stump. It's located near the front here and it's about 1.5 feet by 2 feet. So I'm going to do a nice little circle that's at least 3 squares long and 3 squares deep. Put it right here. It comes right up to the front of this circle, which is very annoying because I would likely place a really nice statement plant there if this stump didn't exist, but it does. So it's there to stay. There's a couple things that I can do with it from a design standpoint, so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. So now that we've got the general shape of our space and have mapped out any pre-existing structures like my fake rock and my stump, now it's time for us to talk about the site analysis portion of landscape design. So first and foremost, sunlight is probably one of the most important parts of your site analysis. I've looked at this area many times at many times throughout the day, throughout many times in the season. So I really have a good idea of what type of sunlight this area receives. The direction that the sun goes in on this particular area is actually from the right side of this plot over to the left side as it appears on this paper. So I'm just going to draw a little sun here. We'll do a little arrow that shows, hey, the sunlight travels in this direction. So it's important to note the direction of the sunlight because of shadows. For the most part, this area does receive full sun. However, because of the direction of this sun moving this way, it is going to create shadows at different parts in the day, depending on where I'm planting my plants. So for example, let's use this rock as a general example here. Since the sun is coming from this direction, it's going to actually create a shadow on the left side of this rock here, which means especially during the morning time, this is going to be a full shade area until at least the sun hits the halfway point, which is typically 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So that's something that I really want to keep in mind when I'm planting this area here, is that this is very likely to be a shady area. Another reason that that's important is when I'm thinking about planting my statement plant, which we'll address in just a moment here, I really want to make sure that if I'm considering any larger plants along this edge here where the sun is going to hit, I need to keep in mind that these are likely to create a shadow on the left side of those plants. So all of this plays a huge role in ultimately which plants I choose to plant and where I choose to plant them. The second part of my site analysis that is quite important is going to be the soil moisture. So in this area here, this happens to be surrounded by sod outside of it, and our sod does have an automatic irrigation hooked up to it. The source of the water is coming from somewhere in this direction. I'll just kind of do that to show that I have a water source coming from this direction. And again, this rock is going to prevent that water from reaching this area over here. For the most part, my stump doesn't really impact water or sun because it's pretty low to the ground and slowly but surely deteriorating. So that's not something that I'm going to need to worry about. But this darn rock here, that's a pretty big obstacle for water and sun to get around. So I need to really plan out my planting accordingly. Other than that, most of these plants get pretty good water. And I do have access to a hose close by that I can easily do supplemental water while they get established. So there really isn't any need for me to include any plants that are drought tolerant for the purpose of including them for drought tolerance, because this area does get adequate water. All right, so we've completed our site analysis. We know where our sunlight is coming from. We've identified areas of shade. We've identified dry or moist areas as well. Now we get to move on to planning out our actual plants. If you have followed some of my other landscape design videos, then you've likely heard me talk about focal points. So focal points are basically points of your landscape that draw your eye, and really it's what your eye automatically settles on anytime you're first glancing at a landscape. Focal points can be a variety of things. It could be this rock. This rock could be a focal point because it's large and it's there. And if you want to draw your eye to it, there's a way that we could create a landscape that draws your eye to the rock. Focal points can also be a beautiful garden arbor or a man-made structure like that. But more often than not, when we're dealing with a native plant landscape, you usually want your focal point to be a large and substantial plant. So for example, a small tree or a large shrub or a large patch of perennial grass that reaches 8 to 10 feet, anything like that that has a wow factor to it and can really dwarf the other plants in your area, that's what you want to use as your focal point. So I'm doubling up on some concepts here because not only did I choose a focal point, but I chose an edible perennial as my focal point. And that is going to be my cherry tree here. Now, full disclosure, this variety of cherry tree that I'm using is actually a combination cherry tree. It has 4 varieties grafted onto a single trunk, and this is not considered a native plant. A lot of your fruit trees that you get are always going to be cultivars. They've been bred to meet specific requirements and to produce a specific type of fruit over many, many years. So 9 times out of 10, the fruit trees that you're working with are not going to be native fruit trees. However, you can have fruit trees that are non-invasive, which is always, always, always the right decision. And you can also use fruit trees that are a lot closer to what their native alternative would be. So in our case up here, native chokecherry is going to be a native cherry tree up here. And then we do also have a native black cherry tree. So because of that, that's why I chose cherry trees. We also live in an area of northern Michigan where cherries grow very well in our climate. We're protected by Lake Michigan. We have great sandy soil. So cherry trees are a no-brainer up here. And that is what I'm going to use as my focal point. You always want to start your landscape design off with your focal point. So I'm going to star this guy up here. This is my focal point, my cherry tree. He's going to get anywhere from 15 to 20 feet. I'm going to prune him annually as well. And my bloom time on that cherry tree is going to be from March through early May. My cherry tree as my focal point is the first plant that I'm going to map out on this section here. There's a couple things I want to keep in mind. My cherry tree is a tree and it will provide shade at some point. So right now, it's pretty wimpy looking. There's a lot of bare exposed branches and hardly any foliage. He's going to make it just fine, but it takes these trees a couple years to really get up to growth and really start to produce leaves and start to produce fruit. So it's going to be a little bit spindly, but I do know that once it does reach full maturity, it's going to cast quite a shadow on the ground. So that's one thing I want to keep in mind. Another thing I need to keep in mind is the root system, especially considering the fact that I have this underground electricity here. Because of the height of this plant, I don't want it anywhere near the front of my area because it will likely block the visibility of the plants behind it. Since my typical point of view on this particular landscape is going to be coming from this angle here, I'm going to consider this front edge here to be the true front of my landscaping, which means I need my cherry tree to be somewhere behind that area. With this being the front edge and me not wanting to block the view, and with this underground electricity here, I'm really left with this area here for my cherry tree. So this is a pretty good area for it for a couple reasons. The cherry tree is one of the few plants, actually probably the only plant on this list here, that can crest the top of this rock and not be impacted by the shadow that it's casting on the left side of the rock in those morning hours here. So this actually really solves for my shady problem here. Another thing is having it located near the back of this plot enables that tree to grow nice and tall, and it will prevent any of these additional plants in the front here from getting blocked by the view. There is one negative, and that is the fact that fruit trees require a lot of water, especially in that first season when they're getting established. They really, really have high water requirements, pretty much daily water requirements. So unfortunately, having my sprinkler source be over here and having this rock be a potential block for that is going to impact the health of my tree. So if I do settle on placing this tree here, I'm going to need to commit to hand watering this plant for at least the first season, and again in periods of drought in subsequent seasons. So just keep in mind, you have to determine during this planning process, what am I able to commit to from a care standpoint, and how often can I get out there to really get a hands-on watering of these plants. So we have our focal plant mapped out, our cherry tree we're going to place here, and now it's time to fill in the plants around it. So once I have my focal point set, I usually like to move from the front back. And the reason I like to do that is because I like to envision it from my own point of view. If I was standing right here looking at this beautiful landscape with a smile on my face, what would I be excited to see first? So that's kind of the way I'm going to treat the rest of this landscape design now that we have our essential things mapped out. I have a few shorter plants that I'm working with here. My wild strawberry only gets to be about 6 inches tall. My wild petunia only gets to be about 12 inches tall, and my prairie smoke is going to be somewhere between 8 and 14 inches tall. The prairie smoke and the wild petunia, these guys do prefer full sun, while my wild strawberry can handle quite a bit of shade and still do very well in terms of producing fruit and producing blooms. This area in the front here is going to be full sun. I don't have anything that's casting a shadow on this front section here, and it is going to receive at least 8 hours of sun as that sun passes through the sky. So I'm not sure that I want to waste that area on my wild strawberry, knowing that my wild strawberry is going to benefit from a little bit of shade. So the two plants that I'm looking at for the front are going to be my prairie smoke here and my wild petunia here. With my backyard landscaping, I have really taken a cottage garden approach to this landscape, which means I like to plant with large clumps of plants, so multiple plants all planted in one area instead of an alternating pattern. And I also like to incorporate a lot of repeating colors and repeating textures. So these plants can be found throughout my yard in various areas, and I'm excited to do more clumps of them in this area too. Because this is such a small area, it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to repeat many of these plants in this small of an area, but the surrounding landscapes that I do have that are adjacent to this particular circle do repeat a lot of these plants there too. So I'm still going to really have that concept of unity that really unites my backyard into one single landscape, even though I'm landscaping each of these sections individually. Working with my prairie smoke and my wild petunia, I know that I want that cottage garden feel, and I know that I want to plant these in clumps. I am working with this annoying stump right here, so I do need to keep that in mind in terms of how I want to subdivide this area. Because these are native plants and because I'm working with a cottage garden vibe, I do want these to be curvy and never working with a straight line, especially when you're working with an outline that's already a circle. You really want to keep those natural lines flowing. You don't want to suddenly convert into nice straight lines because it just won't go with the aesthetic of what you're working with. So working around this stump here, I know that I actually do have a little bit of room in this front little area here to probably add a couple plants in between there. So I'm actually going to divide these right in two. And looking at the heights that I'm working with, I'm going to do my wild petunia off to the right because that's going to stay a little shorter, while my prairie smoke will go off to the left. This stump here is really just in the way. It's not low enough that I can add enough soil on top of it to accommodate a full plant. And it's unfortunately not high enough that I can really do anything else with it. So to be honest, what I'm likely going to end up doing with this specific area is I'll probably end up adding an annual potted plant here, which is what I do with a lot of my stumps. Bird houses are another common one, insect houses are another common one, and then potted plants, usually with annual flowers, is a great way for you to use these stumps up without having to get somebody in to grind them down. So this next summer, when I do have this fully landscaped, I'll show you what I end up doing. Now that I talk about the bird houses, that actually does sound kind of cute over there too. So we'll see. The world is my oyster on that one. All right, moving on to some of my next options. One thing that I do want to mention is we have a really big deer problem back here. This whole area, it's far enough away from the house that the deer feel really comfortable coming up there. We can't really see it at all times unless you're on a specific part of the deck, so they feel free to just eat whatever they want back here. I do know that the deer will not hesitate to polish off the leaves on my cherry tree. So I want to keep that in mind when I'm placing plants around it. The first plant that comes to mind for me is going to be my bergamot. Bergamot, if you've never worked with it before, is actually an herb. It's also another edible plant that you can use for medicinal values, for teas, etc. But it does have this lavender or herby scent to it, and the deer do not like it. They will not eat bergamot. They don't like the taste of it. They don't like the smell of it. So it's a really good defense plant to plant around other plants that you know the deer will go after. So I want to keep that in mind, and I'm likely going to use this area here as my bergamot barrier, and I might even do a little bit more of it behind there too. So I've got my bergamot here and my bergamot here. That's going to be a really nice repeating pattern, which will likely be the only repeating pattern that we have in this design, and that's okay. That's okay, we can work with that. Next on my list is going to be my Hoary Vervain. Hoary Vervain is a shorter version of blue vervain, is the way I like to put it. It gets to be about 18 to 24 inches tall. It has beautiful purple spikes of flowers on it, and the bloom time on that is between June and September. It's actually got a really nice long bloom time on it. So a really stunning addition to add to any landscape. The Hoary Vervain does prefer full sun, so it's going to do really well in this section right here. And I do have a lot of Hoary Vervain, so I am tempted to potentially add a little section of it here. I think we'll just have to see how that works out. All right, so I have a couple plants remaining, and let's just talk through the logic on these. So sneezeweed is actually going to be my tallest herbaceous perennial here at 30 to 36 inches tall. So we're talking about a pretty tall plant that boasts these gorgeous golden yellow flowers, and the deer tend to leave it alone, especially when it's in bloom. So it is a plant that I definitely want to include in this area. My sneezeweed is going to be full sun. It will bloom much better in full sun. So pretty much the only area that I have for it is going to be this area to the right of the rock. Now, fortunately, the sneezeweed that I do have is in plugs, and these plugs are about 3 inches long, maybe 1.5 inches wide. So I don't need to dig as large of a hole for these plugs as I would for like a potted plant in a quart or a gallon-sized pot. That's great news, because this is the section that I need to hand dig with my fingers to avoid this underground electric line that's only about 2 feet under the ground. So sneezeweed is actually going to be an excellent choice here because I'm able to safely plant it. I don't have to dig large holes. It's getting full sun, and this height of the sneezeweed, 30 to 36 inches tall, is only going to block out this rock, and I don't even think it'll block out the very top of it, so that's still going to be a visible structure in there, but it's not really going to block out any other plants, because on the other side of this rock is, of course, my cherry tree, which is going to be 15 feet at a certain point. So sneezeweed is a no-brainer for this section right here. I'm left with 2 plants on my plant list here. Now, 9 times out of 10, actually I would say probably 10 times out of 10, I never use all of the plants that I have listed out on my list. I just like to know what options I have to choose from so that I can narrow down what options I'm actually going to plant in my area here. So hairy woodmint did make my plant list because I have it planted elsewhere in my yard. It would help tie in this area over here, and it's also a deer resistant variety. However, hairy woodmint does prefer partial shade, and I really don't have any other partial shade areas where that plant would be appropriate in this area. So I'm actually going to eliminate this one off the list completely. So my last remaining plant is this wild strawberry, and I do have a great location for that. Wild strawberry makes an excellent ground cover that helps retain moisture, blocks out other weeds from popping up, and just adds a nice little layer of green. Of course, it's got white flowers and red strawberries throughout the season, so it's just a nice ground cover plant that you can add into your landscaping, and it does really well under the canopy of trees. So I'm actually going to plant my wild strawberry beneath my cherry tree. So with this wild strawberry ground cover down here, it's going to do a really nice job of filling in this area. While this tree becomes established in those first few years, a lot of sunlight's going to be able to hit the ground, which means I have a higher risk of weeds popping up and competing for nutrients and water against my cherry tree here. So I like my wild strawberry as a ground cover to prevent those weeds from popping up. They're also going to help retain more moisture in the soil. They're going to add back organic material as the leaves die off and as the strawberries die off. All of these are great things. Additionally, wild strawberry grows really well in partial shade. So once this tree does reach maturity and has a lot of foliage on it and creates a true shadow beneath it, my wild strawberry is going to keep on trucking down there because it can handle that partial shade just fine. So wild strawberry is a really nice versatile ground cover, and it's a really great option if you're planting it under the canopy of other trees as well. We have our area fully mapped out, and of course it's time to color code everything to bring it all together. All right, we're all colored in. This gives us a much better idea of what types of colors we're really tying into this area here. There's a couple things. Wild Petunia is actually going to be more of a purple color, but I already used purple for Bergamot. Prairie Smoke is more of a hot pink color, and then our Hoary Vervain is almost a blue-purple color. But this does give us an idea of the variety of colors that we're working with, and I really like the fact that I was able to incorporate most of my favorites in here for the space that we're working with. So a couple other concepts that I wanted to just bring to your attention. We talked about that cottage garden feel. So this is definitely a cottage garden vibe because we're planting in clumps instead of repeating patterns like you would see in a formal garden. We also have some repeating colors that we're working with and some repeating plants. So Bergamot, we've got Hoary Vervain, and then the other plants that we did choose, we have repeated elsewhere in the local area here. So wild strawberry, there's actually a wild strawberry patch under one of my larger trees that I have off to the side here, and then I have sneezeweed up along a ledge that goes behind this section here. So we do a really good job of tying in this area with the other landscaped areas of our yard. Now that we have our map complete, our very next step is of course to plant. So this is our design guide. Things absolutely will change while you're planting, but as long as you come back to this guide and say, this is the vibe that I'm envisioning, this is the general concepts that I want to bring to life back here, then you can't go wrong with whatever you decide to plant. I completely forgot to mention some edible perennial alternatives to my cherry tree, like I said earlier in the video. One of the most popular ones that I love to recommend to people in our area is elderberry. Elderberry is an absolutely beautiful perennial shrub. It has these gorgeous white flowers on it in late summer, and then it of course produces its delicious fruit, which can be processed into a wide variety of edible products. So elderberry is a really popular choice that people love. Your chokecherry trees, your black cherry trees, those are going to be really similar to the cherry tree that I am including in this design today. And another great option that I love to recommend if you're really into fall colors that pop is going to be your Serviceberry Shrub. It does have these edible service berries on them, and those can again be produced into a wide variety of edible products. So that's another great option too. That's all I have for the design portion of this specific landscape plot. Of course, if you've been watching our videos, you know how much I love designing native landscapes. These are so functional and so sustainable, but above all, they're really low maintenance once you get them in the ground, once you get them established. So walking through this process and really taking your time to do your site analysis and map out the qualities that you've observed in your site analysis and put them on paper or put them in a digitized program before you select the plants that you're going to plant. That is key to really producing a landscape that's going to last you for many, many years to come. Thanks so much for tuning in with me today. Thanks for sticking it out through that explanation. I have several videos like this for shade gardens, full sun gardens, partial sun gardens. So if you want more guidance on designing your native landscape, I have a ton of videos out there for you to observe. We also have officially launched our very first native landscape design course called Wild Beauty. It is available on our website, and I will link it in the description below, but we're super excited to bring this to you. We're purposely launching this in the fall, so it's something that you can kind of do as you wish through the winter, and you'll be ready to design your dream garden next spring. So be sure to check that out, Wild Beauty. It's our native landscape design course, and of course we have an early bird deal on it as well. That's all I've got for this video today. I sure do appreciate you taking the time to check out our channel. It helps out small businesses like ours so much. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I sure hope to catch you next time. Bye-bye.